historically, disaster or emergency response donors don't stick around because there's no ongoing justification. It's like, yeah. My heart was moved. I gave. I did my part.
If your organization is an organization that does this work, then you definitely have the justification built in because you are staffed in such a way on your program side and your emergency response side that you're always going to be doing this type of work. We were able to continue to fundraise in an unrestricted sort of way for future things, and it would fill that fund so that there's more immediate response when a disaster occurs.
Vila-Sheree Watson, welcome to the Sustainable Giving Podcast.
Oh my goodness, Dave, Rayleigh, it is my pleasure.
Oh, I am so excited to have you here. You and I have met several times, mostly in the DC region at various events, the Bridge Conference and otherwise. And by the way, I love the fact that this is a video podcast because I have to point out you are so easily spotted across the room. You have the most beautiful hair. Now I'm saying that so that people have to watch the video to see what we're talking about. But if you've seen Vila-Sheree, you know I love that.
Thanks, Dave. I encourage everyone to embrace your grace.
I love it. Well, I'm doing that myself. So, but no, we've gotten to know each other a little bit more and more, and we've got some mutual connections. We just had Tina Hudgens on the show, and you've worked with her for many years. Such a gift.
She really is. I worked with Tina, and also Tina is just a friend, after 20 years, right? And I consider her a mentor of mine as well.
That's so awesome. And I love the small world. And that's the beauty of, I've been in this industry for a little more than 20 years, and it's still just like, I don't know why it still surprises me when I run into people that, it's like, oh, there's this whole area of the world that I have no idea, didn't know existed. And yet then, okay, well, I know so-and-so knows so-and-so, and so-and-so worked with so-and-so. And so I am looking forward to today, especially given your background, in disaster emergency relief. You've been with organizations like ADRA International, like Plan International and Lutheran World Relief. You're now at VP of Development and Membership at Bread for the World. We'll talk about that in a minute. But you wrote a piece, and we'll get to it in a little bit, that really struck my interest in this conversation. But before we get there, you've got one of the most fascinating, you write a newsletter, an email newsletter. It's called Bag Secured. Totally caught my attention. Like, what does that even mean? So, like, what is the Bag Secured and what inspired it?
In the modern vernacular, getting the bag means, making money or, and so because it's a fundraising focused newsletter, it's called Bag Secured, so that it teaches people about how to get the bag. And it's especially tailored towards either small nonprofits or nonprofits that might have a small team. And so it's my goal to help people shore up their fundraising capacity, if they are either at a small nonprofit with a small budget or they have a small team.
Yeah. Well, and you've been there. Obviously, some of the organizations we're talking about are, pretty large as well. But being able to invest in that sector, and as somebody who, writes a lot of words for a living, I have so much respect when you take the time to articulate what you're thinking. And I don't know if you've had this experience, but it's like, I talk about this stuff all the time. I should just be able to write the words that I say, right? And it's like, no, that is so much work.
Oh, thank you for that. It's my pleasure and it's my honor. Fundraising is my favorite thing, and I can talk about it or write about it all day. I love it that much.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I respect the amount of work, and it's worth it. It's worth it for you. It's a benefit for you, but it's also a blessing to others. And so as we talk today, I want to talk about this bridge of sustainable giving and in relief and advocacy work, because you've been in that intersection, and how organizations that deal in either crisis or policy change even, that can still build consistency. So we'll get to your article in a little bit, but I feel like relief and advocacy organizations really live in the world of the urgent now, right? It's just, I feel like any organization I've ever worked with moves from crisis to crisis, but especially in the world that you've worked, How do you introduce sustainability into that culture?
Mm. So it's important in that culture because often organizations that deal in advocacy or in humanitarian crisis or emergency response, those donors are often one-time donors, or you have very large major donors that are supporting that work. And in order to have any type of sustainability to weather the ups and downs of that type of giving, sustainable giving is very, very important.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think about some of the organizations. I remember one of the first organizations that I ever worked with is called World Vision. A lot of folks who would have heard of it. And I remember seeing some of those like donor counts, these donor migration reports and being like, whoa, look at that huge bump in, whatever the year was, 2007 or, um, whether it was a Haiti earthquake or a tsunami response or whatever, right? And I've been and as a naive young fundraiser thinking that's awesome. This is the new normal, right? And then
Mhm.
realizing about 2 years later, it's not the new normal. Those folks maybe didn't stick around or didn't give a second gift or what have you. And so I think, thinking about your experience, what does it look like to think about living in a environment where your organizational job is in part the mission of the organization is to respond to these disasters, and no two disasters are alike. How do you help lead an organization towards thinking about, yes, we may move from disaster to disaster, but we need our donors to not move from disaster to disaster.
And while we're talking about this, I just want to start off by saying that understanding that when an emergency happens, because I don't want us to sound too flippant, but when an emergency happens, someone is having the worst day of their life. And so really understanding that whether it's conflict or whether it's a natural disaster or some other crisis, uh, when we are putting that offer before people, I want them to understand that, this is life and death a lot of times for folks. And whether that's a long tail emergency like Gaza or Ukraine, or it's something that is more urgent and immediate and it's a shorter recovery time, it's something that we have to remember when we're doing this type of work and how important it is and the lives that it is actually reaching. But it is important because, as you said, often our finance people, our CEO and executive types really get excited when they see that big leap and say, hey, can you replicate that storm? Can you do it again? And often it doesn't happen because you lose the bulk, about 70% or even 80% sometimes of those donors when you go back to your regular communications plan.
Hmm. Yeah. There's several things that come to mind, and we'll dig into your article, but the one of the things that I remember learning, early on in my career was this concept of cultivate as acquired. And I'm curious as to what you think about this. And there are some organizations that are more longer term, oriented. So cultivate as acquired means essentially if they gave to thing A, you should probably keep fundraising on thing A, because when you pivot to thing B, they may or may not be that interested in it. So a perfect example in the social services, human services space is I've worked with a lot of what we call rescue missions or food banks, right? And a rescue mission might get somebody to give a first gift on the basis of meals at shelter, right? Give to provide a meal. But then the organization only wants to talk about addiction recovery or, job placement or whatever. And it's like, turns out the thing they gave to is probably the thing they're most likely to continue to give to. How does that play out in the disaster or emergency response space?
Yeah, it's really hard because a lot of times when you initially have an emergency crisis, it's restricted, right? And you want to move people along the continuum to give to your unrestricted pot, to continue to give to your organization, right? And so I do believe in messaging people based on how they came in as acquired, as you mentioned, and often an organization has other priorities, and so they want to talk about other things. But I am the person that's always advising, no, let's talk to this cohort or this group of donors or this segment about the thing in which they were acquired. And you can supplement that communications plan with other topics that relate to, what it was they initially gave to. Because if they're interested in that thing, they're likely interested in the thing that is very closely related. But I definitely agree with, sticking to where people are giving and doubling down on that.
Well, and that's perfect transition. So you wrote a piece on your newsletter called "Urgent to Usual: Retaining Emergency Donors," and so first, just what inspired you to write that piece? Like, what pattern were you seeing across the sector that led you to that?
Yeah, the very patterns that you're talking about how you get all of this excitement and all of this interest when you have an emergency. And the numbers show that because donors really believe, and it's true, that there's something that they can be doing now. And that's very enticing to people that have a heart to help, right? And so what happens is when there isn't an emergency, when you're in normal times of talking about your mission, those donors tend to fall off. So one of the things that I have seen to be a little bit helpful, because you're going to always have those people that are just like, contact me in emergency. I'm an emergency donor. They're going to stay in that bucket. You have that percentage of people. But then you have those that are like, I'm here to help with whatever is needed. And so what you want to do is take that segment of donors that is given to your emergency, put them into a cohort where you are always, even if you're talking about something else, you're always leading with the emergency that they gave to. So, it's like, thank you for giving, you know, because of you, we were able to do this in Haiti after the earthquake,
Mm-hmm.
and then you go say, but there's still more need. And you go on to talk about those, ancillary needs that your organization has. And that is also how to move that appeal into the unrestricted territory. And through a series of communications, you begin to offer that sustainer offer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm fascinated with when you connect the dots between, say, a Haiti earthquake and we're going to be, I don't know how to say it kind of eloquently, but there's going to be the next earthquake or the next
Mhm.
tsunami or the next
That's right.
mudslide or whatever. And so, how do you pivot those donors to say, hey, thank you so much, affirm, affirm, affirm? You might have ongoing recovery efforts, that you
Mhm.
can speak to specifically in that region or that particular disaster. But what kind of messaging have you found really resonates to say, but we're going to be there for the next disaster, or likewise, we're going to be here for the long term. Like after the news crews go home, we're going to be here for the long term. We need your ongoing impact.
That's exactly it. You hit the nail on the head, is to talk about, if your organization is, because one thing I don't believe in fundraising for things that you're not actually doing. So if you're the temptation is there, right? If your organization is actually going to be a part of the recovery, I think that you should say that. You should tell donors that. I think that that's important. If your organization is going to be responsive to the next emergency, you're going to help us to get shored up for the next emergency, because there are places in the world where we know there's ongoing conflict. There are places like the Philippines where we know the next storm is coming. And so, help us to get ready for that next storm so that, the people are more equipped for when that storm hits. And so those are the types of messages that there's a particular part of your emergency response cohort that's interested in preparing for the next crisis.
Yeah. You used a phrase in your piece, and that was, quote, I'm going to quote you here, turning urgency into habit. What
Mhm.
does that look like in practice?
In practice, it really looks like, and some organizations have done this. I would love to do this at an organization. I haven't had the pleasure, but some organizations have created a separate sustainer program that is just for these emergency donors, where they are feeding this type of communications into this group of donors all the time. And I think that that's absolutely brilliant. I think that just hearing about that is something that would have a lot of potential for growth, and a lot of potential for a way to funnel those donors every time you have a crisis and you have donors that give to that crisis. So, yeah, in practice, I would love to do that. But what I have done in practice is offer the existing sustainer program as a pathway to continue to give for urgent need.
Is there a way to, I mean, even just tactically, right? Okay, so they
Mhm.
respond, they give a gift online. Is this like a part of the welcome conversion series? Do you try to tailor it per disaster? Like, I just, what is that? What is that actually? Are you calling them? Are you texting them?
Mhm.
What do you see, or have you seen that seems to work to connect the dot from that emergency response donor to then that invitation, or likely multiple invitations to sustainability?
Yeah, it really is. Your digital program is king here, right? And so really connecting with those donors via SMS, via email series, definitely a welcome series introducing your sustainer program. But it cannot be your normal sustainer program introduction series. It needs to be tailored to whatever they lack.
Is it a specific emergency or the thing they've responded? Okay.
That's right. And
Makes sense.
so it takes a little bit of work on the back end, but once you have that, it is something that you'll see that, wow, disasters have a longer tail than what they normally do.
Yeah. Well, and to the earlier conversation, also, if your organization will be there for the long term, right? If you do have some sort of development or recovery effort, making sure that's super clear. Like, you gave because your heart went out to these people in wherever, Southeast Asia, et cetera. We're going to be there. Now, to your point, if you're not going to be there, don't say that. Talk about, we are going to be there for the next disaster or the next moment, and try to connect. The thing I talk about a lot is, what does your ongoing value proposition look like? A lot in fundraising, we've talked increasingly over the past decade about value proposition, which I think is critical. Like, why should I give to your organization rather than some other organization, or not at all? However, with sustainable recurring giving, it's got to justify ongoing giving, which is why I think historically disaster or emergency response donors don't stick around, because there's no ongoing justification. It's like, yeah, my heart was moved. I gave, I did my part. And so to me, I think it's about, how do we create that ongoing value proposition for the donor that tugs at that heartstrings? It's not going to have the same sort of emotional peak that, when people are just shocked by whatever has happened. But it does have to justify, why should I give on an ongoing basis?
Yeah, if your organization is an organization that does this work, then you definitely have the justification built in, because you are staffed in such a way on your program side and your emergency response side that you're always going to be doing this type of work. And what one organization, Lutheran World Relief, did was create a disaster restricted fund. And so with that fund, we were able to continue to fundraise in an unrestricted sort of way for ongoing
For future.
disasters, and it would
Yeah.
for future things, and it would fill that fund so that there's more immediate response when a disaster occurs. And so that's something that can be enticing to donors, is that, when something happens, we can be right there. And so because we're always filling this fund. And you have to do the follow up to share stories of how they have helped, share stories of the people that have been helped from their donation.
I'm curious, do you have any experience with, and I don't, having like, oh, it's a dedicated sustainer program for the quote unquote ongoing disaster fund?
I do not, but I've always
Yeah.
thought that that was a good idea and never had an opportunity to get there. But I've always wanted to create that
Yeah.
alongside your regular sustainer.
Yeah, it'd be fascinating. I have one organization I've worked with that essentially has had not that exact thing, but they've had two sustainer programs, and I was very maybe nervous is not the right word, but like, let's not divide our attention. That's the potential concern, is now we've divided our attention. Now we're running two separate programs. But this particular organization has such distinct, these two different offers. Like, people that give to this main sort of central part of the organization are giving because of what the organization does. But this secondary piece that they do is so distinctive and so candidly inspiring and valuable, that they successfully were able to essentially create two recurring giving programs. That is not my normal like recommendation,
Mm-hmm.
but I would be fascinated. And by the way, for our listeners, if you're at a relief organization and you're doing something like that, we would love to hear it. Or Vila-Sheree will go and pilot it, and we'll learn from that.
I would love to hear about that as well. For in the comments, for people that comment, to hear about that. In some way, I think that for organizations that have really their brand, they've become known for something. I could see how it could work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to talk about intentionally designing for retention. So once you've converted them, in this case, let's say to recurring, because that is happening more than ever before. I have multiple clients, one right now that does quite a bit of relief work, and they've added, 25, 30% to their file this year in recurring giving. And a lot of those, by the way, those disaster donors, I'm curious if you have seen this or have any experience with it, but a lot of those disaster donors are increasingly signing up for recurring gift from their first gift.
Mm.
And so, and I haven't been able to talk to them. I don't know why, but increasingly, and it certainly matches with what I've written about with the subscription economy. But any experience with that?
That's really interesting. Are you saying that uh, as they compare the donors, the regular donors that are in their sustainer program to the disaster donors, they're seeing an uptick in the gift amount disaster donors are giving per month?
Yeah, no, I think it's more that, so, in any emergency response situation, right there, you get 1,000 new donors or 10,000, new donors giving to that, often to that. And those are pretty much 99% one-time gifts. I don't know the percentage, but more than 1% now are that first gift, new donor first gift is a recurring gift from the get-go.
Mm. No, I haven't had any experience with that, but that's fascinating.
Yeah, and I think I
Yeah.
think it comes down to this kind of consumer behavior that we've first been conditioned by with subscription economy,
Mhm.
but that has then led people to, and this is hypothesis because I haven't, like I said, I haven't talked to these donors. I'd love to. Why did you, in the face of whatever this emergency was, not just give a $50 or $100 one-time gift, but why did you commit to an ongoing gift? Some of it is candidly the way the organization is asking. I have one client who has seen, oh gosh, 100% growth in their recurring donor program, which was not small before, over the last 18 months. And part of it was they just led with a recurring ask on their disaster stuff. And so they actually start like defaulted, very clear, your ongoing gift is needed, and let people switch. And they called new recurring donors, by the way. This is a pro tip, especially when if you choose to default your forms, you got to be super clear. This is a monthly gift. But this organization also called all new recurring donors, basically saying, "Hey, thank you so much for your ongoing commitment. That means the world." But it was an affirmational piece, but also Vila-Sheree, it was a check just to say like, no, I didn't mean to do that on a monthly basis. I meant to give that as one time. Okay, that's totally fine. And then the operator could update their gift just as a courtesy. But it's just amazing what happens when we actually like ask.
I will say that I have seen, rapid growth, especially when testing that sustainer first offer. Um, it really does cause people to, hmm, I can do that, especially if it's an offer that's at a certain giving level, that's doable, a level where they don't have to ask a partner. They don't have to really think about it. It's like $25 a month, certainly. And if you lead with that offer, I have seen, I'm telling the guru here, I have seen, market results in growth in sustainer programs.
Yeah. Well, and you and I are both committed to whatever it is that's going to increase the impact of the organization. And if that's recurring, awesome. Amen. If it's not, so be it. Right. And so it's definitely something, though, that, again, I think it comes with donors being conditioned that that's not an unusual ask today. We're just, as we record this episode will come out after, I think it will come out after Giving Tuesday, but we're just about to do a live stream conversation on sustainable giving at Giving Tuesday. And I think it's a perfect example of what we're talking about, which is Giving Tuesday has been such a huge boon to the industry and to donors and to generosity. But increasingly, donors are choosing to give on Giving Tuesday, and they're choosing to commit to a recurring gift.
Yeah.
And so a lot of these sort of, you just kind of think of them. If you don't think about them too hard, you're like, no, that's like a one-time gift thing. Like, yeah, give a gift this Giving Tuesday. It's like, no, become a freedom partner, this Giving Tuesday or whatever. And increasingly donors are choosing to do that. And so part of this is just what people are comfortable with. And I don't know, do you remember the first time you gave a gift online with a credit card? It was like kind of nerve-wracking. Like, so they type in this number to this nonprofit's website. Is this going to be secure, right? Well, today we don't even give it a second thought, right? So as people get conditioned by these consumer trends, we just see them, taking those actions.
And I would say the big difference for most organizations anyway, between, emergency giving and Giving Tuesday, is that Giving Tuesday really is a reflection of your file. Most of the people that give to you on Giving Tuesday know your organization. They are not, that emergency donor necessarily. In emergencies, you often get a lot of new donors. And the reason that is, a lot of times who wins the race is who's first to market. There are three things that have to come together well in order for emergency response to work. And one of those we don't have control of. And that is, how high is that thing in the media? Is it leading the media? That's the one we don't have control of over. The second thing is who's first. You have to get your messaging out, your first email, your first SMS, I would say within the first 12 hours of an emergency happening, in order for it to be most successful. Even if you're coming out with, we're monitoring the situation. We have boots on the ground, something very generic because you don't have all of the details yet. You want to get out first. And that really does help to boost that giving. And the third thing is, what has been your practice with speaking to your donors? Are you talking to them through monthly appeals? Are you talking to them on a regular basis? Because much like a friend, if I haven't heard from you all year, I'm not giving to your urgency. If you're in a crisis, all of a sudden now you want to call me. I haven't heard from you all year. Who are you? So you have to have had that regular cadence of communication in order for that emergency to really hit.
Are you looking to build sustainable recurring giving for your organization? Join me for the Sustainable Giving Workshop happening this next January 28th through the 30th in beautiful Tacoma, Washington. This exciting 2.5-day summit will be part workshop, part retreat, and all experience that you can use to grow sustainable giving at your organization. We're going to be meeting in the creative heart of Tacoma, which is just outside of Seattle, and this intimate workshop will blend insight-rich instruction with hands-on coaching and peer-to-peer connection. You'll leave with a clear, customized plan to grow recurring giving, practical frameworks and fresh insight, a new connection with like-minded nonprofit leaders, and a renewed sense of vision and energy for your work. Space is limited, so I recommend reserving your spot as soon as possible. Simply go online and register at sustainablegiving.org/workshop. Again, that's sustainablegiving.org/workshop. I hope to see you there. You've been in relief organizations, so you know this better than most. But for folks that aren't aware, like, you've got to already have the plan in place before the disaster strikes. And every organization that I've ever worked with deals with crisis. Like, whether or not your core mission is to go to, places after a natural disaster or a political disaster or whatever, that's kind of beside the point. We all deal with crises. The question is, are we prepared? Not for the crisis, to be clear, because you literally, by definition, you can't really prepare for the crisis. But this client that I mentioned that had their program double in the last 18 months, they had seen the sort of writing on the wall, the opportunity really for recurring giving. They had made a bunch of changes, and then a crisis took place, and people, and it was fortuitous timing that they were already moving in the direction of sustainable recurring giving, so that then when the crisis, that added fuel to the fire, people signed up in droves. And so we don't know when the crisis is coming. The way I always like to say it is if necessity is the mother of invention, people talk about that, then crisis is the mother of innovation.
Indeed.
And it's those moments where we have to innovate. And this is why it's important before the crisis or in lieu of the next crisis to actually be investing in these things and being prepared.
Yes. To that end, can I also put a plug out there for acquisition and for those who might be considering cutting, your acquisition? Acquisition really is your pipeline to your sustainer program. It's your pipeline to one-time giving. And I will tell you, when we really invested in acquisition in a major way at Lutheran World Relief, when we got to the Ukraine crisis, the long tail of that investment that we had done over the last 4 years landed us in seven figures, for that crisis. And so it really is important to continue with and often when, as many organizations are facing these, budget shortfalls or budget constraints, in this particular climate that we're in right now, often acquisition is the first thing that organizations want to cut. And I will say, don't do it. Because
well, and we recently had Sophia Machado Limas from Operation Smile on the show, and one of the things she said was a breakthrough for them. They were trying, and they had all the best intentions to be sustainer first. Was what we were talking about, and yet the nervousness and the budget, and we've got to hit these numbers or whatever, really was, as is common, really preventing them from being able to do that. Well, one of the things they did, Vila-Sheree, that I thought was really wise. And it wasn't for sustainable giving. It was just a sort of a budget strategic planning move. They moved to 3-year plans, 3-year budgets and 3-year plans. And then I think they moved to 5-year, if I'm not mistaken. And so the reason I bring that up is because it is the most common to cut acquisition in light of the dollars you got to make this year or this, this next 6 months. But when they were making those decisions and budgetary decisions on a 3-year cycle or even a 5-year cycle, you could actually literally just show this revenue goes from here to down to here to down to here if we make this cut. And so I don't know how to get more organizations to do that, but I thought, wow, if you can advocate within your organization, again, this is regardless of sustainable giving, it helps to say, hey, what does a 3-year budget look like? Obviously, the board's got to approve probably each fiscal year in turn, but let's develop them as 3-year budgets. I thought, ooh, that could be a breakthrough for organizations.
That's certainly right. Because even if your organization is still going to stick to the 12-month or the 18-month budget, the way, whatever your organization does, you as a fundraising leader can still model that out, as backup for why your expenses look the way they look on your budget. So
yeah,
I love it.
Well, I'm going to pivot in just a second to what's been happening with one-to-one giving, sponsorship, et cetera. But before we leave this topic of emergency donors, what do you think is a common mistake that you see when it comes to emergency fundraising with regards to that recurring giving?
Oh, wow. I would say not offering it at all.
Fair. That is a very common mistake. That is
very
touche.
Right? Because people are focused on the emergency and they're focused on dollars in the door. And so, and even fundraisers can fall into that trap. And so I think it's important. I think also that feeds into you not thinking of it as a long tail type of thing with that group of donors. I think that that's really important, is to really build out your strategy prior to an emergency happening. What is our response time going to be? What are we going to offer? What is going to be the follow up? All of that should be in place, even though the specifics of the content will vary.
Well, let's just do some quick math. I was thinking about this in the emergency relief situation. Let's say you might be so bold as to consider defaulting the ask and really encouraging people towards recurring giving. You're going to potentially get fewer, right, total new donors if you do that. I don't know what the average new emergency single gift donor in terms of their lifetime number of gifts. I mean, you said it's 80% attrition. That's right. So maybe it's, what do you think? 1.5 2.1, whatever the lifetime number of gifts are.
Right.
Compare that to the lifetime number of gifts for your new recurring donors.
Right.
My experience, and I would love to do this literal comparison that we're talking about here between disaster single gift donors and disaster recurring donors. But the average recurring donor, in my experience, gives between 35 and 45 times. So I always just split the difference and say 40. So let's say you get 1,000 new emergency donors, single gift donors, and they're going to give 1.1 times or whatever, the 1.2 times, right?
Right.
You're going to get 1,200 total gifts if I do that math right. If you get this, if let's say instead of 1,000 new emergency donors, you get 100. Let's say it's real disappointing, and you get 100 recurring donors, but they give 40 times.
That's right.
I can't. Right. Let me do that math. Is that 4,000?
Even if it's $25 a month, let's say, and say that one-time emergency donor gives $500, I think it still works out to be recurring. So I think you're right.
Yeah. So I think, and I do say this, and I think for our listeners, this is important. Long-term value is simultaneously the most important metric in all of fundraising.
Yes.
And it's the most misunderstood and least utilized metric in all of fundraising. Partly because it's kind of weird, like what is LTV? Is that lifetime value? And how do you calculate that? And so I'm a big advocate, even if you don't know it and haven't done the analysis, just take your average sustainer gift, multiply by 40. Like that's a good ballpark, you know. You might be a little low, you might be a little bit high, but put that on all of your reports. So put that on your acquisition report, not just we got 1,000 or 100 gifts or 10,000 gifts or whatever at this, this average gift, but then add a column called estimated long-term value. That will completely change the way you look at your reporting, because you literally have built in long-term value into your reports. And so much of our decision, we talk about long-term value, like in the boardroom or on podcasts, but then we're going to make really difficult decisions, and we're making daily budget, decisions, or should we invest in this channel or that channel? And we don't put long-term value there. It's like, even if it's estimated, you're going to be way better off by considering that as a part of your decision-making.
I think that's really smart. And that's a great boardroom metric to share, because I think that often as fundraisers, that's what we're trying to do in boardrooms is justify, programs. And I think having that column, that's really smart, Dave. Thank you. I'm going to steal that one.
Well, this is the fun thing about getting to geek out about this stuff, is it's like, ooh, I hadn't thought about that before. Like, okay, if you were to just do a mutual report on your emergency donors, number of gifts versus your recurring donors and those long-term value differences, like that will completely change the way you think about emergency fundraising. Okay, so let's talk about like child sponsorship one-to-one. I've said many times, and anybody who's read the book or heard me speak has heard me say this, but just for if you haven't, there's 3 kinds of recurring giving programs historically. The first is what I would call one-to-one. That is where the donor is paired up with the beneficiary in some way. So that is like, you see that in organizations that do like child sponsorship or staff support, but where I know as a donor, or I'm matched up with a recipient, a beneficiary. The second type of recurring giving historically has been membership, and that is where the donor is at least partially the beneficiary. The donor themselves is benefiting from the programs or services. So I listen to the program, or it's a local zoo or museum or public television or public radio. There's a lot of charities that exist to do education and publications. Those would be what I would refer to as more membership oriented, because you're actually providing benefits to donors. And then the third category has been literally everybody else. It's been the left behind category. That's one of the reasons I spent so much time researching and writing the book, because that category is no longer left behind. So we've talked about emergency relief, which is definitely a lot of times in that third category, which is like, good luck, historically. But the truth is today, because of the trends that we're seeing, because of donor behavior, because of smart strategies like we've talked about, emergency relief organizations are seeing that transformation. Let's pivot. You've worked at organizations that do sponsorship and one-to-one style fundraising. How have those been shifting from your perspective?
100%. I can talk about that. What we have seen in one-to-one, like child sponsorship programs, worked in an organization that whose primary revenue source in terms of private fundraising was that for so many years. And what they realize is not only at a national level, but at a global level in that organization. And also in the field, organizations that do child sponsorship programs. That was a line that is beginning to decline. And it's declining, I think, primarily because social structures and social constructs have changed. The commodification of another human being, rightfully so, is falling out of fashion. And while it was a highly personal relationship, you send your child a gift on their birthday, you stay with them until they're 18 and they graduate from the program. It has become something that is increasingly falling out of fashion. So, what the organization that I was a part of did was start a regular sustainer program alongside that program as it was naturally declining and sunsetting. Less investment was being put into that program and more investment was being put into this new regular sustaining giving program. And while that I left that organization and that sustainer program had not yet caught up to the many, many years of what child sponsorship was doing, you could see it beginning to grow and beginning to increase. And I think over time, as that program sunsets, you'll see that. And then, other organizations I've seen in the field have just abandoned their child sponsorship programs altogether. So that's also a trend that you're seeing out there as well.
That's interesting. And one of the things that having worked in a lot of different types of programs, one of the things that I think kind of was implied or existed within either a staff support. There's a lot of faith-based organizations that do kind of a staff or missionary style model. Is humanizing the impact, is like sort of getting out of the way of the logistics of the impact. We distribute medical supplies, or we ship containers around the world, or we, whatever. We so much, I think nonprofits can get caught in like logistics and like talking about what they do and not about the beneficiaries. And so one of the things that I think honestly has been one of the reasons why that one-to-one model has worked so well is because of that human, like, I am giving to such and such a person. Now my gifts may be getting pooled into that region or whatever, technically, but like the feeling is like I am connected with another human being, and that kind of humanized connection, I think is one of the reasons why those programs have had such high retention and value. But like I've said, the subscription kind of is really changing the game for everybody. But how can we continue to like humanize the connection and the impact in a world with that one-to-one being challenged for some organizations?
That's right. And, as you said, it's a matter of, scale and scope. And organizational brand, or do we get down to that human story? And I think that we know that even from one-time giving fundraising, that people want to hear that. They want to hear Mary's story. They don't want to hear the story of Mary's village. You can mention it, but they want to hear that single story. And I think that that doesn't change when it comes to recurring giving. And I think that it's important in, acquiring new recurring donors that you feature some of this. You can be helping people like this person who's experiencing this or that person who's experiencing that, just so that they know that there are real people on the end of their gift.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so interesting, because I do think, there's got to be, it feels like, or let me ask it this way. Is there a way to maintain that human dignity, that connection, those things are so important culturally, and that kind of human connection to the impact? Like, people give to people, right? Like I even think of local causes that we give to, and the people that I've literally sat in the room with, and stuff like that, and how motivational that is. I worry that we lose that in this kind of interest of saying like, hey, we've like, have you seen a way that can take place in a way that you feel like appropriately, honors the individuals on both sides?
That's right. I think organizations have gotten much better in the 20 years that I've worked in these type of organizations, in having those that are program participants tell their own story. I can remember a time where we would go out, we used to say into the field. We don't use that terminology as much anymore. And we would collect the story. We would take pictures and jot down stories and record stories. And now that process has changed quite a bit of uh, talking over with program participants about, would you like your story told? Here's how it can be used. Would you like your children photographed? Just common courtesy that didn't happen 20 years ago is now happening.
Permissions, yeah.
And I'm happy to see that shift. And so, therefore, the person who's a program participant has agency in the types of images that will be shown, in what they would like to tell, and in how their story will be used. And I think that's a very important distinction in how this is happening now, as opposed to what was happening.
Well, I'm actually reminded you've take me back. The very first organization I ever worked with was a human services, social services organization. And I remember the very first program I ever worked on was a meal a day program, and it was like a monthly giving program. But Vila-Sheree was like so painful because the like fulfillment rates were not great, and people would commit, but it's like and my hypothesis was it's a meal a day. Like, okay, some abstract meal didn't get served, but there were thousands of them, so one meal, like. I don't know why, but donors were not super responsive to it. And then even when they did commit to the program, they didn't fulfill at very good rates. So what we did was we worked and we transitioned, because the reality was this organization was working. Their population, the beneficiaries they were working with, were completely different than what they had, than what the general public thought. And so we began to tell stories, human stories of individuals that were being impacted by the program. But, and the thing that you caused me to think about is these were what we would call representative sponsorships. So we were not, it wasn't like your gift is, we need 10,000 people in the program so that we can have 10,000 donors sponsoring them, right? It was like, no, there were hundreds, I think, of people in this particular program because of the work they did. And so we would tell stories each month of a story of somebody who had been impacted, benefited from the program. Mm-hmm. And in that way, to your point, like that was all the vetting and the conversation and the, it wasn't like we were trying to produce 10,000 stories. We were trying to produce one or a couple, a month. And I think that enabled us to tell those stories in a way that was completely privacy compliant, as well as honoring to the individuals. And so I do wonder if that is a key part of the future.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's a great change that we made in the field.
Okay, so we are nearing the end of our time. I want to ask you, what does sustainability look like for us, not just for donors, but for us as leaders? So you've been doing this work for a few decades now. What keeps you inspired and keeps you showing up?
Wow. That's the white hair, right? Yeah.
Especially depending on which day and which emergency is being responded to, I'm sure.
I would say what keeps me coming back to this work, honestly, is what we were talking about. What keeps donors coming back? It's the person that's at the end of the line. So even though, now I'm in an advocacy organization, I just joined about 6 weeks ago. By the time this airs, it will be a few months that I've
You'll be a veteran, a grizzled veteran.
And often in advocacy organizations, you don't necessarily see the person at the end of the line, but you know that they're there. And that is the important part for me, is making positive change in the lives of people. That is why when as I told you before the podcast, I spent the first 10 years of my career in the for-profit space. But once I found nonprofits, my heart opened up and I said, and I've never left. And fundraising has become one of the most important things in my life, because I believe that money is mission. And, often, people say, oh, I don't want to be transactional, or I don't want to do that kind of thing in there. But we are giving donors the opportunity to do what they want to do anyway. And so that keeps me coming back year after year, again and again, to this work.
No, I love that. So good. So good. Okay, if you could wave a wand and change one thing about how nonprofits approach recurring giving, what would it be?
Mm. I would say I would love, and some nonprofits are ahead of us and they're already doing this, but really have sustainer first offers. I think that it's important and dare I say, even in major giving, that is something that is often not talked about. Often if a donor will give a major gift, they'll give 500 or $1,000 monthly as well. And so it's something that I think a lot more organizations could grab onto, and they will find that it really will help their organizations in dividends.
Here, here. That's a great point. And that is, we're seeing that more and more. And I still, though, to clients will still ask, "Oh, is there like a upper limit on who we should talk to about monthly giving? We don't want to quote unquote downgrade donors." And what I say when I hear that question is, I have never seen a single piece of data that illustrates that subsequent giving for larger donors, middle or major donors goes down. In fact, I've seen multiple statistically valid studies that have showed that subsequent giving goes up in every cohort, and it goes up the most in middle and major donor levels. So here, I totally agree. Well, Vila-Sheree, thank you for being on the show. Thanks for just investing just who you are, for the journey you've been on, across these organizations, and for taking the time to actually write some of your thoughts down and share that with the world and encourage leaders, whether they're with a small organization or a large organization. I appreciate you.
And can I say thank you to you? Your book is a primer, if you will, for those that are either building a sustainer program or who have an existing sustainer program and they want it to grow. Thank you for your gift, because it's really changing things for all of us. So we appreciate your research and packaging it all for us so that we can take advantage of it. Thank you.
Oh, well, you're welcome, I guess is what I'm supposed to say that. I always never know what to say. I appreciate that. It's, as you know, it's a lot of proverbial blood, sweat, and tears. So sometimes real, but well, thank you. And until next time, if for our listeners, if this got you thinking about generosity, we are always investing in that. Where can people find you if they're looking for more or just want to track you down?
Yeah, so you can always find me on LinkedIn. I'm the only Vila-Sheree.
Yes, for our listeners, VILA dash SHEREE.
That's right.
Vila.
And I would love for you to find me there. You can also find me on my Substack, which is just Substack and /bag secured. I would love to have you join me as a free or a paid subscriber. We talk about a lot of good stuff.
Love it. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Sustainable Giving Podcast. I hope you found the information helpful and that you're able to walk away with insights that you can use to start building a steady stream of recurring revenue for your organization. For even more resources to help you build a thriving recurring giving program, go online to sustainablegiving.org. That's sustainablegiving.org. And lastly, if a leader comes to mind that you think would benefit from this episode, would you do me a favor? Would you share this episode with them? Just that little act could be the difference they need to start growing sustainable recurring giving for their own organization. Until next time, thanks for joining us.